Hello, welcome to another installment of Stigma-Free Learning Live with the Stigma-Free Society. As always, I am your host of this bi-weekly Facebook and YouTube live event with the Stigma-Free Society. My name is Samara Liberman. I'm so happy to have you here. The gender pronouns that I use are she and her, and I am a programs manager at the Stigma-Free Society. I am also the person who creates all of the lesson plans and downloadable resources that are housed on our Student Mental Health Toolkit. If you are new to this live event, welcome. It's very great to have you here. This is still a relatively new live event for Stigma-Free, so we're always excited about new viewership. If you are new to this live event, I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of a background on me and on the Stigma-Free Society and talk a little bit about the purpose of this event and what you can expect from today and from all future live events that are the Stigma-Free Learning Live. So again, my name is Samara Liberman. I am a programs manager at Stigma-Free. I have a bachelor's degree in equity studies, a master's in teaching, and a professional development certification in early years mental health. So the Stigma-Free Society, if you're new to our organization, we are a decade-old Canadian registered charity that focuses on reducing and eliminating stigma of all kinds with a specific focus on mental health. So one of the primary ways that we work at reducing and eliminating stigma is through education. So all of our resources are preventative in nature and are intended to provide education and learning around mental health, mental illness, and all forms of stigma that people experience in society. So for this live event, I will be walking you through a lesson plan that is featured in the Student Mental Health Toolkit. This is what I do every week or every other week on this live event is talk you through a resource that is on that toolkit. And this live event is really intended for educators to be a way of kind of getting a deeper understanding into the resources that we have on the toolkit, a way to kind of learn about what I was thinking when I designed this lesson, why I chose these topics, ways that you can implement it in the classroom, and kind of a further explanation about the lesson plan or resource that I'm talking you through. So on the toolkit, we have a grades 4 to 7 section. We also have a grades 8 to 12 section. And every other week, I go over a lesson plan for one of those age groups. Last week, we did a lesson plan for grades 8 to 12, so for the high school students. And today, we're going to be looking at a lesson that works for the grades 4 to 7 age range. So the lesson that we're going to be looking at today, if you want to follow along, is the When Worries Become Worrying, Understanding Chronic Anxiety lesson plan. Again, this is for grades 4 to 7, so if you are an educator for anywhere in that age group, this lesson plan will work very well for you. If you are a high school teacher, come back next week to see the complementary lesson plan for this one for the older age group. So that's kind of how it works. Every other week, it's looking at the lesson plan that is complementary for the age group that I looked at for the following week. So we're going to dive into the lesson for today. But before I do so, I really want to encourage you to respond, leave a comment, give us some feedback. At Stigma-Free, we really want our resources to be user-friendly. So everything that we're creating is to be used by you, the educators and school counselors and school staff that are accessing our toolkit. So any way that we can improve this live event or any of the lesson plans or resources on our toolkit or our toolkit in general, we are so open to that feedback, and it really helps us to do work that serves you better. So please engage with this video or, leave a comment or a question or something that we can do to improve this, or, any content that you want to see us creating, any topic ideas that you have. I'm always looking for new topics. So please, please, please leave that feedback here, or you can leave it directly on the toolkit. So we are getting into the lesson plan today. So if you want to follow along, please open up the lesson plan that is the Understanding Chronic Anxiety When Worries Become Worrying lesson plan for grades 4 to 7. So it can be really hard for young people to distinguish between stress, anxiety, and chronic anxiety. It can actually be difficult for anyone, adults included, to make this distinction. So this lesson plan is really designed to understand the distinctions between these different mental health challenges, these different experiences that we all face, or some of us face and others don't. So it can also help your students seek help for potential anxiety disorders that they may have. If they don't really understand the difference between just like regular anxiety that we all experience and what might be a chronic anxiety disorder, that can, be the difference between them seeking help for a potential anxiety disorder or not. So we all experience anxiety from time to time. It's, a very similar experience to nervousness, but anxiety is kind of like the step above that. So this lesson plan will help your students to kind of conceptualize the idea of anxiety a little bit better, and also help them to see that anxiety is very common, but the regular and consistent experience of anxiety could be an indicator of a potential anxiety disorder or some chronic anxiety that they might want to seek help for. So it also provides suggestions of things that your students can do if they are feeling anxious or if they suspect that they might have an anxiety disorder or be experiencing chronic anxiety. So this lesson will provide your students the opportunity to kind of think through ways that they can support themselves when they are feeling anxious, because that's a really hard thing to do in the moment when you're really feeling it. It can be really great to have things kind of already set in motion or ideas already kind of in your mind of what you can do to support yourself if you are feeling anxious. So the curriculum areas that are covered in this lesson are health and physical education as well as career education. So the health and physical education curriculum in BC, I think, does a really great job of incorporating mental health into the learning objectives. So I think it's really great that it looks at health from a holistic perspective, from the physical health perspective and the mental health perspective, and kind of fusing those two areas together as they do very much intersect. And the career education curriculum addresses quite a bit about working in community and relying on others for support during challenging times, which also very much ties into the content of this lesson. So the video that your students are going to be watching as kind of the first component of this lesson goes over the difference between stress and anxiety. So this is a really great introduction into the content that's going to be covered in the remainder of the lesson, as it will get your students thinking about this distinction, which is really important, and can be hard for people to understand. Like I said, it can be hard for everyone to kind of understand where that line is between stress, nervousness, and anxiety, and when those kind of very common feelings can become more of a problem that needs to be looked at in a deeper way. So the guiding questions are intended to check for comprehension with the video that they've watched, as well as to look at some of the topics that are discussed in the video. So, for example, asking them what some of the differences are between stress and anxiety will clue you into how much they are paying attention to the video and some things that they might already know about the distinction between stress and anxiety, which will be very helpful for you for the rest of the lesson to kind of get an understanding of where they're coming from and their understanding of these concepts before you've even dived into the lesson. So the activity for the lesson involves going through some examples of the differences between stress and anxiety. So you can also remind them that anxiety occurs when typical things that cause us stress end up becoming blown out of proportion in our minds. And you can see, and the possible outcomes are considerably worse. So the possible outcomes that they're thinking through are considerably worse than what they will likely actually be. So stress is a very natural response to a stimulus that we feel uneasy about or unsure about. And so is anxiety. This is a very natural response. However, when anxiety persists for long periods of time or begins to interfere with our daily lives, our commitments, that's when it might become an issue that they might need to seek help for. So use the two contrasting examples in the lesson plan that I've laid out for you here to ensure that your students understand the differences between stress and anxiety. So you'll see that one example kind of goes over a very regular stress response to a stimulus. The other one looks at a very anxious response to a stimulus. So it's kind of saying like, okay, there's something that I'm stressed or anxious about, but the anxiety response is kind of taking the stimulus or the reaction to the stimulus or the outcome and kind of blowing it out of proportion or exacerbating the potential risk factor or making it seem like, it's kind of the snowball effect of, well, if this happens, then this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen. And these are very normal anxiety responses, but they can really interfere with our daily lives, and we need to be able to find coping mechanisms to deal with these like big reactions to things that we find stressful. So once you've gone over these examples with your class, provide them with some time to think of their own examples. So now that they've gone over these examples with you that you've kind of outlined in the lesson, and they've watched the video, they should have a sufficient amount of knowledge to be able to come up with ideas that are, that do distinguish between stress and anxiety and be able to do this themselves. So having them come up with these examples will also allow another check for understanding about the distinction and can give you more space to do some further education if you feel like that's necessary. So if it doesn't really seem like they're grasping the difference, you can kind of explain it in a different way or explain it further to make sure that they really do understand this very important part of the lesson. So you can explain to your students that and if anxiety becomes a very persistent issue that begins to affect them in their school life, their social life, or their families, or their physical well-being, it might be something that they should seek help for. So you can provide them with some examples of ways that they can gain support for their anxiety. If it becomes a persistent issue, tell them that they can reach out to you directly and you can support them in getting help, or that they can go to another trusted adult, or even starting off by talking to a friend about it and then kind of working up from there and then speaking to you or a family member or somebody else in the school environment that they trust about these feelings of anxiety and what they might need to support them. So the active part of the lesson provides your students with the space to come up with some potential suggestions of things that they can do for themselves if they're feeling anxious. So I think this is a really great way to do some preventative work for your students. So if they are feeling anxious, they have some ideas that they've come up with and co-created with their classmates of things that they can do to support themselves and try to reduce the experience of anxiety that they're having. So you can give them as much time as you see fit for this brainstorming activity. I recommend that you have one person in each group write down the ideas that they come up with during the brainstorming so that they have something to take away from the activity. So kind of like a piece of paper that they can have that they can all take with them, so that they have something physical that they can refer back to if they are experiencing anxiety, to kind of have like a little coping mechanism cheat sheet, for example. So doing this activity in groups will allow your students to think through some of the coping strategies with stress and anxiety that they might not have thought about on their own. As noted in the lesson, coping with anxiety really looks different for everyone. So sharing these ideas with each other can be a really great way for them to, think through some of the coping ideas and strategies in a different way, or get new perspectives that they might not have thought about. Or it can even be a really great way to share some experiences of anxiety that they've had with each other so that they can, understand that they're not alone, that their friends and their classmates have experienced these things as well, and kind of get some ideas of things that they've done to support themselves. So it's really important in this lesson to facilitate a safe space for this activity and to ensure that none of your students feel judged by their peers about any of the ways that they cope with their anxiety or about their experiences of anxiety or stress in general. I think it's really important when we're talking about mental health challenges or a mental illness or a chronic condition that your students feel safe in these conversations. So I really encourage you to kind of facilitate that environment from the beginning and then ensure that it's maintained throughout this entire lesson and through the entire conversation about stress and anxiety. So once the students have brainstormed some ideas of things that they can do to cope with anxiety, have them share their ideas with the class. So this can be through formal presentations if you want each group to kind of stand up in front of the class and talk through some of the things that they've come up with, or what they can do is kind of go from group to group and partner with another group and share their ideas in a more personal way that way. So whatever you see is kind of the best fit for your class and your students. So then the final piece of the lesson is the lesson closure. So discuss with your students how anxiety and stress can really deeply impact our lives. When feelings of stress and anxiety persist over a long period of time, our physical and mental health can suffer in a really big way. So explain to them that it is crucial for them to find ways to cope with their stress and anxiety, as it will continue to come up throughout their lives in big ways and in small ways. And the earlier they can find the coping strategies that work for them, the better, and the more manageable their stress and anxiety will be. So I think, again, this is a really great kind of preventative strategy, a thing that they can do kind of ahead of time when they're not in an experience of anxiety or stress, to kind of find ways to deal with it before things get really bad. So that's the lesson for today. It's a really important lesson, I think, to be talking about. I think a lot of young people experience anxiety and don't really know what to do about it, or don't really know how to talk about it. So another important piece of this lesson is kind of creating a discourse and giving your students the vocabulary around anxiety so that they can have these conversations. So let's say they're reaching out for help from an adult or from a friend. They now have the understanding of what stress and anxiety are so that they can properly articulate what they're experiencing. So they might be able to say, hey, like, I'm experiencing really bad anxiety, whereas before they might not have known if it was stress, if it was anxiety, if it was nervousness, and what the distinctions were between those three things that can kind of get conflated in our minds, or that we might not understand very deeply. So I hope you found this helpful. I really hope you use this lesson with your students. I think it's a really great entry point into conversations about anxiety. Anxiety, as I said, is a very common thing that everybody experiences from time to time to varying degrees and for varying lengths of time and for various reasons. So I really hope that you find this helpful and that your students find this helpful. Again, please always feel free to leave a comment, share your feedback, give some suggestions about content ideas. I'm always here to respond to your comments and to engage with you in any ways that I can. And follow us on all of our social media for the promotion of this event and for the promotion of all of our other live events and for releases about content on our toolkits. And thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you not next week but the week after for the complimentary lesson plan for this one for the grades 8 to 12.